the power of hatred changes a person's life and trajectory, and how the power of love and God's kingdom also absolutely transforms a life. But how it happens is quite fascinating.
With me today is T. Martin Bennett, the author of this incredible book, Wounded Tiger. And it is this story that started World War II, the United States involvement in World War II. The man that led the raid on Pearl Harbor, his life was dramatically changed in many different ways. But to talk to us today about that is T. Martin Bennett, the author of this book. So welcome to Charisma.
John, thanks very much for having me on your show.
It's wonderful to be able to connect with you to talk about this amazing testimony. And you've had to do some research to kind of get to the nitty gritty of what actually happened with this story. So I'm going to let you tell it better than I can, but we don't have all the time to go this in depth. But just kind of give me a synopsis of what happened in this story.
So Wounded Tiger is the true story of the pilot, as you mentioned, who led the attack in Pearl Harbor, but his life was changed by an American prisoner and by a girl he never met. So he's really a very, very, very unlikely convert, and he wasn't even seeking the kingdom. He just stumbled across these things. So I came across this story. I'd never heard anything about it, which was surprising because I know quite a bit about history, World War II. I worked in Christian ministry, so I heard lots of conversion stories. I never heard a single word about this guy. So when I stumbled across it, having already researched the life of John Newton, who wrote the song Amazing Grace, I was shocked and amazed. And I thought, wow, this is an unbelievable story. I researched it, I dug into deeper, and I realized, oh, this is a heavy lift because I don't really know the Japanese side of World War II, but I really felt a sense that the Lord wanted me to do it. I mean, very strongly. So I spent about 3 years on research. I met with as many people as I could, had war historians and experts vet the story. The more I dug, the better it got. So this is really a story of hope, a story of transformation. It's a story of overcoming obstacles that seemed insurmountable. And it's also a story of amazing coincidences at least, and providences at best, that are, millions to one odds that these things would ever take place. And it's situations where you think there's no way it can work out for good, and it does. And that's part of the story.
Yeah. So this pilot, I mean, let's just back up a little bit. Japan is not a Christian nation. Shinto is the primary religion there. They believe that their emperor is God, or if not God, a god, and right. There is this deity worship. And people were really willing to give their lives. In kamikaze pilots that was a big deal in World War II. But tell us a little bit about this pilot's life. Mitsuo, am I saying this correct? Mitsuo Fuchida?
Well, correct is a broad word because there's correct in Japan and there's correct in the United States. So
yeah.
It looks like Mitsuo Fuchida. In Japan, it's Mitsuo Fuchida, which is kind of odd, even for me to say it, because I say it, Mitsuo Fuchida, but, you're close enough.
All right, I'll take that.
So he, like many other young boys, aspired to be in the military, a prestigious place. You get to wear these cool uniforms. And in their day, the Japanese were trying to catch up to the West industrially, commercially, and militarily. So they built this great, vast armada of ships, and they were gearing up for war. They wanted to colonize other nations, as they had seen the British and the French and the Dutch and the Germans and the Americans. They wanted to colonize too. So they go into Korea and China. But they didn't really want to fight the United States. They just wanted to have the freedom to go into Southeast Asia. And that was really some of the roots of the cause of why, the Japanese went into Pearl Harbor. But him as an individual, he was selfishly ambitious, and he had no interest in faith or anything. But there's three stories really in the story of Wounded Tiger. Of course, Fuchida, who led the attack, selfishly ambitious, very smart guy, handpicked by Admiral Yamamoto, not only for the Pearl Harbor attack, but also for the Midway attack. But then there's a guy named Jake DeShazer, who was an American who joined the military because, to be honest, he just couldn't find a good job. And that's where he went. So he ended up training in the U.S. Army Air Corps, which was a precursor of the Air Force. And he volunteered for a secret mission he knew nothing about, called the Doolittle Raid later on, the first American attack on Japan. and he did bomb Japan, but his airplane ran out of fuel. He bails out, gets captured by the Japanese, and here are the people he wants revenge on, who's captured as someone who's bombed the country, and they were furious at these guys.
Mm-hmm.
He and the other raiders were tortured, beaten, put in, solitary confinement, fed very little. Some of his friends died, some were killed, some died of exposure. It was awful. And he said in his own words, he was crazy with hatred. So this is what drives the story forward of how do you go from being crazy with hatred to having a changed life? What happens and how does it happen? So this isn't really a story explaining things. It's a story showing things, showing how the power of hatred changes a person's life and trajectory, and how the power of love and God's kingdom also absolutely transforms a life. But how it happens is quite fascinating. The third plot line, to be very quick here, is the Covell family, parent, husband and wife, and 3 children. They were missionaries and teachers in Japan, but when they saw the Japanese government ramping up for international war, they decided it wasn't a good, safe place for Americans. They fled to the Philippines. They sent their kids to the United States. And these 3 plot lines have nothing to do with each other, but ultimately, this girl, Peggy Covell from the Covell family, ends up becoming the fulcrum of change in Fuchida's life, although he never meets her. And how that all happens is really interesting. And I mean, it's extraordinary. This is one of the most extraordinary stories I've ever come across in my life. And I've had people comment the same on the book, Wounded Tiger.
Yeah. And so this is actually the 3rd printing of this.
Correct.
So it's done well, because this story is such an amazing story of transformation. I mean, I know a little bit about this, and I know we don't want to kind of give it away, but I think we can say that that he comes to know Jesus through
he comes to faith,
forgiveness.
right?
Yeah.
But it's extraordinarily unpredictable, because I knew that when I started studying his life, and my picture in my head of what was going to happen was worlds away from what actually happened. I thought, wow, this is one heck of a story. I've had dozens say it was the best story they'd ever read in their life. I mean, dozens of people. It has a higher 5-star rating than Grisham's The Firm, which is his best-selling book. So, and the thing that's unusual about the story, Wounded Tiger, is that it appeals across the board. I've seen people who are not interested in church, faith, none of that stuff. I mean, they're repelled by it. But this story is a compelling story. They find themselves engaged and wanting to find out what happens. And the net result is they feel that their lives are impacted for the better. I had a friend read the book, not religious in any way. And we had dinner with her and her husband, and tears are rolling down her cheeks. She said, Martin, I just feel this affected me. I need to be a better person. I can see how these people love others. I want to be that kind of a person. So, I mean, at the bottom core level, that's a good thing. And it's helpful and encouraging, I think, to just about anyone.
Yeah. I mean, this story has definitely been something that I've known about for a while, just because of the place that I worked before. You were a guest there, and the book Wounded Tiger has been something that we always look to. And it's like, how do we promote this story even more? Because the issue of forgiveness is such a crucial part of this, because when these 2 men actually meet, it is a remarkable picture of God's forgiveness. Can you talk a little bit about that moment there?
Well, before forgiveness, there has to be offense, and there's lots of offenses, really terrible things that happened in this war. Innocent people died, innocent people, or maybe guilty people, being tortured. A lot of hatred, and hatred fuels hatred. So, the question is, where does this all stop? And we know where that answer is, but getting there practically is not so easy. But what it took was, among other things, recognizing that, well, Jake DeShazer says when he was in prison that he was crazy with hatred. And he said, I don't want to be this person, but what do I do? He had no idea. All he could remember was his mom, and his mom was a believer. So, I mean, a shout out to moms out there. You're in a very, very powerful, influential position, whether you know it or not. So he reflected on his mom. He tried to find a Bible. Eventually, the books were passed around in the prison. He read the Bible voraciously, and he kind of was careful about giving it a shot, but he realized he was doing wrong things, and he apologized to God. That was the first thing. And then he started befriending the guards, and it went from there. With Fuchida, he didn't feel really guilty about what he did. He was serving his country faithfully. That's the way he saw it. He was a hero in Japan. But as time went on and it turned into a catastrophe for Japan, millions of dead people, cities destroyed, not just in Japan, but in all Southeast Asia. And of course,
Right.
Hundreds of thousands of Americans. I mean, he felt responsible and he was suicidal after the war. But when he heard about this girl, Peggy Covell, who loved her enemies, he thought, why would you love your enemies? You should hate your enemies and destroy your enemies. That's the way he grew up. But when he saw what she had done, he realized there was something going on with her father's story, which he heard about. And then he thought, well, the thing that hit him hardest was when he was reading the Bible was, forgive them for they don't know what they're doing. And he realized that was him, that he was a person who did not know what he was doing, horrible things, and he wanted forgiveness. And that was really the beginning of his journey.
Yeah. And that's a powerful journey. One that we all can relate to, and we need to take those steps forward to find our forgiveness in Jesus Christ. Our time's about over here, but I want to make sure that people know how to find this book, Wounded Tiger, which is a true story of the man who led the raid on Pearl Harbor, and DeShazer, I forget his first name.
Jake DeShazer. Yeah.
Jake DeShazer.
So don't take my word for it. You can go to woundedtiger.com, read the first chapters free. There's also a sizzle reel on the movie because I wrote this as a script first for a feature film. I am in talks with a number of Oscar-winning producers on getting that done, but it's all about the book right now. And it's a positive, encouraging story. You can read, I think, 7 or 8 chapters of the book for free and see what you think.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great reviews online about this. As you said, there's a lot of 5-star reviews. And in the beginning of the book, there is so many endorsements, I guess, that from well-known people that have read this book and has changed.
Yeah, those
their lives.
endorsements are on the website as well. And the book, one thing that's unusual is there's over 300 photos in it. Images, maps, letters, and everything else that really bring the story to life. It's also written in the format of fiction, although it's a true story, highly vetted and highly accurate. I think Truman Capote's book, In Cold Blood, was done that way. But what it does is it makes it immersive, that you feel like you're there. I've had many people say, I felt like I was in the place while these things were happening. So it's a fun read. I've had people read that 600-page book, John, in a single setting.
Wow.
Many people have done that. But I'm not saying you will do it, but it is kind of a page turner, I've been told.
Yes. And it's a wonderful story and something that we can all relate to, as we need to forgive. And even those that don't know what they're doing, we need to forgive them. And so, Martin, thank you so much for joining me here on Charisma to be able to share this powerful story of the Wounded Tiger.
John, it's great being with you. I appreciate all your comments. You have good questions. Great interview.